The following is a Shaw TV Public Affairs presentation. Constituency Report is produced as a public service by members of the BC Legislature through the facilities of Shaw TV.
Welcome to Constituency Report on Shaw TV. I'm your host, Megan Blackier, and here with me today we have Education Minister and MLA for Victoria-Swan Lake, Rob Fleming. Thanks for joining me, Rob.
Great to be here.
So it has been a bit of a crazy summer. Over the last little while, a lot has been happening in BC politics, and as a result, we have the first NDP government in 16 years. So I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about how the transition happened and how you're feeling about everything right now.
Yeah, well, as people will recall, it took a while to figure out who the government was after the election on May the 9th, and eventually it was confirmed, and we swore in a new cabinet of a new NDP government after 16 years, as you've correctly said, this time in coalition with the Green Party, with a working agreement for their support. So a minority government, that was July 18th, and ever since then it has been a very, very lightning fast transition. People working hard in every portfolio that they have, having very little time to get ready for a budget update this fall. And you know, from my perspective, things have been going very, very well. It's great to see Premier John Horgan on the national scene, working with the Prime Minister and other premiers to represent Canada's interests on the softwood file, driving critical reforms here in British Columbia on a whole number of issues. Investments in education and healthcare, mental health, fixing the services that the public relies upon, addressing some of the difficulties I think that we're seeing in rural British Columbia as well. So very ambitious agenda, but much has been accomplished already in just a very short period of time.
And on that note, you mentioned the portfolios. I know a lot of parents, kids, teachers, they're very excited to have you in the role of Education Minister, especially after a little bit of turmoil with the last government. So can you tell me a little bit about that role for you, what you've accomplished already, and perhaps what the next few months hold?
It's an exciting portfolio. There's no question about it, and it's one that I'm very honored to have been to have received the appointment by the Premier. And we're working really closely with all the critical stakeholders in the education system. I have to say, there's just been tremendous support and enthusiasm from everyone from superintendents right down to parents' organizations at the district level and at the school level. Working with principals and vice principals, a new relationship with the BC Teachers Federation, which I think has been very helpful, especially as we undergo one of the most ambitious teacher recruitments in generations, literally, hiring 3,500 teachers and having them in place. Hasn't been without bumps, of course. So the government left us a few surprises. We had to scramble very quickly to deliver on a number of promises. We had less time to do it than we thought, but I'm pretty pleased with where we are. We have 60 school districts right around the province, and the feedback we're getting from parents not being nickeled and dimed over fees so much, the school system having some breathing space, superintendents and others out there recruiting new teaching talent in the school system. There's just a boundless amount of positive energy in the school system right now, and that's a very good thing. That's just what the system needed. We have had some chaotic and confrontational years in the school system, and I was pretty pleased to be a part of a government where, for the first time in years and years, the conversation around September was not about cutbacks, school closures, strife inside of communities, and fewer resources in the classroom for our kids' learning needs. It was about the opposite. It was about hiring thousands of teachers, reducing class sizes, stabilizing rural education, reopening schools that had been closed over the past 16 years, and putting new learning resources in place for kids, those with special learning needs, of course, and but for all learners coming into the school system. So for a new parent enrolling their kid in kindergarten, to have dramatically smaller class sizes and be the first generation of students to experience that, the feedback I got was that's something pretty special.
That's very exciting. It is, again, a change that people have been asking for, and they're very excited to see it, and everyone seems to be very happy with the progress that's been made so far. And, on that note, we have seen some changes in education. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about what's happened with the entire government, with some of the commitments that we've made and that we've fulfilled, and how that's been coming along in other areas, other services besides education.
Yeah. Well, I think you saw a very robust response to the opioid epidemic in BC, so there has been some new resources and focus and a distinct ministry for mental health and addictions, bringing additional focus to this crisis. I'm very pleased to be working with my colleagues, Minister Judy Darcy and Minister Adrian Dix, the Health Minister, on this file, because here on the South Island, where I represent my constituents, this has been a tragic epidemic that has claimed lives and ripped apart families, and so we have some cabinet focus. There is a lot of good political will around the table to try and get a handle on this and to work with other provinces who are experiencing a similar problem. Similarly, I think we've really moved quickly on what I would call an anti-poverty or reducing inequality initiative. There are several things within that. One was to look at people on disabilities who are really on a pension system, and we added additional payments per month there, restored some of the transportation benefits that were taken away by the previous government. So there's been, for a lot of people, there's been a better quality of life agenda pursued really quickly, and we've just got to start on this. I mean, I think for minimum wage earners in our economy to give them a raise is really important right out of the gate, which we've done, and we have a minimum wage commission now to get us towards $15 an hour going forward. And I think for middle class people too, who are tired of getting dinged by the previous government on, I think there was 10 different tax increases on medical services premium. The healthcare tax became a really big deal and a really big expense for middle class families. By cutting that in half, 50% reduction coming January 1st, that's going to put money in people's pockets. So that's very welcome news for my constituents as well. And I think also the small business tax cut that Carol James, the Minister of Finance, introduced is something that's extremely positive for employers right around my region and of course in our province, to help those that are doing the hiring and creating jobs with some tax relief. I think is a very progressive move, and very pleased to be supporting that with the budget that we have before the legislature.
And in that, you spoke a lot about affordability, be it with the MSP, increasing disability payments for people. What else is happening on the affordability front? It's been such a crisis in housing, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the progress that's been made there already.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people will look ahead to the February budget where we will have an emphasis on childcare. That has been, investing more in early childhood education, both in quality, but the availability of spaces and the affordability. I mean, this is the second largest expense for most working families after their mortgage, and we need to drive some relief on that and have a much better childcare system than we've had in BC. And in fact, aim as high as we can. British Columbians should be entitled to have the best childcare system in the country, and that's what we aim to provide over a number of years as we make improvements. It has huge economic and social dividends to our society. As the education minister, I can speak positively to it because unfortunately we have far too many kids arriving day one for kindergarten already behind. These are generally kids that are somewhere on the vulnerability index and have had no interplay with early childhood education, so they're showing up not having learned in those early learning years. That's crucial. So that's something that we'll be working on. But I think in terms of affordability, there's a housing agenda there that we're looking at pursuing. We've helped restore some balance and add some resources to the residential tenancy branch. I think on the fairness agenda, I'm very excited that we have relaunched the Human Rights Commission, having been an absolute outlier in Canada, the only province that didn't have one after the previous government abolished that commission. We've restored it, and I think that's going to be very good for people who are looking for administrative fairness in our province.
Great. And housing, I'm wondering if you could touch a bit on that and how it relates to us locally here in Victoria with the rental rates, with the need for more affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both it's a supply issue. There's on the one hand, so our government has already committed to funding thousands of new units, both something that can be established quickly, and this would primarily be for a single people, modular housing. It can be you can create hundreds of units with a very short construction time lag. And we're also going to create thousands of family affordable housing units as well. So to add to the portfolio that the nonprofit sector and the co-op sector and the Capital Regional District Housing Corporation has in our region, the fact is that we have not added to the thousands of units that we've traditionally enjoyed here. So we have a lot of catching up to do, and I think that's one of the reasons why rents have skyrocketed so spectacularly. So there's some legislation to come as well around how rent controls can be more reasonably enforced, or I should say the rent restrictions that we have in place, where there have been a number of well-known loopholes that the previous government failed to address. I've certainly had constituents who've fallen victim to rent evictions that have been unscrupulous, and we're looking at a way to provide something that's both fair to the tenant as well as fair to owners of apartment buildings that do indeed need to be upgraded and improved.
Great. So we just have a few minutes left here for this segment, and you've spoken a lot about affordability, and one thing that has been very clear and that has helped people straight out of the gate is getting rid of the tuition fees for adult basic education and English language learning. With housing, we may not be able to fix it overnight, but getting rid of these tuition fees was a great example of something that got done right away and helped people right away. If you can discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, that was an announcement we made very early in our mandate, within, I think, 3 weeks of being sworn in as government. And I'm very proud of Premier John Horgan for wanting to fulfill that commitment we made to the public immediately, in time for the academic school year that we've just started in September. So I think people will understand that when the previous government imposed tuition fees for those who were wanting to upgrade their high school transcripts to then get into a trade or vocation or other post-secondary program, they were creating barriers and poverty traps. And we saw the impact immediately. We saw a 30% reduction in adult basic education enrollment. In some regions of the province, it was even worse than that. So that was a failed policy, or a cruel policy, I'll put it that way. And it's one that we are already seeing some early strong success signs that people are enrolling in courses, they're making improvements in their lives, they're getting they're getting the ability to transition into post-secondary education, and that's exactly what we want. We want people who are raising kids, that are income insecure but have ambitions and dreams for their families and themselves to get into a trade or a vocation, or help out with the nursing shortage. We'd love some people to take early childhood education, by the way. We spoke about childcare recently, and we want to make that a much better compensated, valued profession. So there are a lot of people that need certain types of training where we're short in our labor market. So it makes sense, perfect sense, to help people who didn't complete high school or maybe didn't have the kind of transcript that could get them on into another training program. So it's a solid investment. We know the repayment is, for the individual, is life changing, but for us as a society, the economic case couldn't be better.
So it really sounds like we're trying to take care of people, putting affordable childcare in place through K-12 education and in post-secondary as well. It's very important to have it the whole way through. Now we do need to take a quick break here in just a moment. After we come back from the break, we'll be talking a little bit about what's been going on in the legislature so far this fall session. So be sure to join us here. We are with the Education Minister and MLA for Victoria-Swan Lake, Rob Fleming. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back to Constituency Report here on Shaw TV. My name is Megan Black here, and I'm here today with Education Minister and MLA for Victoria-Swan Lake, Rob Fleming. So, Rob, before the break, we were talking a lot about the commitments that we've already fulfilled as a government, improving services for people and making life more affordable. Now, in terms of what's been going on the last little while, we've actually had a fall session here at the legislature, and there's been a lot accomplished so far on that front with legislation that we've passed. And I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about banning big money. That was a big thing during the election and something that a lot of British Columbians were very concerned about.
Yeah, that's a signature piece of legislation. It's one we committed would be the first bill introduced into the House, and it was, if you don't count the routine finance bills, supply bills. And I'm very happy to say that it's already been given royal assent. So, sorry, we're still in debating on that, but it will be given royal assent soon. So that will be the law of the land, and BC will go from being the most unregulated backwater, the wild west of politics, as the New York Times called us, where virtually there were almost no restrictions into the power of corporate and other donations that were making their way into the political system. So we'll go back to the way politics was intended. It's about the individual, the average citizen who can give their vote and give modest donations to the party they support, and that's what politics should be about, not buying influence or being seen to buy influence. And I'm very pleased because BC has been very late to the game here. The previous government for 16 years refused to do anything about this issue. It became a bigger and bigger issue in the minds of the public. I'm very sad to say that it taints all politics. We need to rebuild trust and credibility in the political system, and I think the place you start is by banning big money, and I'm very happy that Premier Horgan has not only lived up to his commitment, but done it with some flair and style, because I know that he's very committed to having this legislation be achieved in short order.
And related to that, there has also been some legislation that's come up in regards to lobbying. Now, a lot of people might not necessarily know what that term means, so if you could explain that a little bit and what this legislation means and what the purpose of it is.
Yeah. So there are third parties that lobby on behalf of different interests, business, financial, what have you, or professional bodies who want things like legislative changes or budget adjustments, all those kinds of things. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it has to be reported transparently. The public, again, should know who's working, over here in Victoria on behalf of clients, and what they're doing and who they're meeting with. Also, we think that there should be additional restrictions on when people can transition out of being senior civil servants, for example, or political office holders to becoming lobbyists. So we've imposed a longer transition period. And that legislation, again, it'll be passed. It has the support of our Green partners in the legislature. So with the New Democrats introducing this bill, it will become the law. And I think, again, it just gives the public additional confidence and assurance by shining a light on some of these practices, which should go on, or they're not likely to disappear, but they need to be properly regulated so that so the public can have confidence that it isn't backroom politics, it's legitimate policy making, policy proposals, response from government, and all those kinds of things.
And sort of related to that again, really making people the center of our politics, we've been talking a lot about proportional representation.
Yeah.
That's been very exciting for people. It's had a lot of time in the media recently with the legislation that we've put forward. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. There will be a referendum in November 2018 where British Columbians can decide if they wish to change their voting system to one that is much more frequently used than the sort of first past the post system that we have here in British Columbia, and really just a handful of democracies around the world continue to use, or whether we want to embrace something that's usually associated with more West European or Scandinavian countries. In fact, there are parliaments throughout the world that use more commonly a proportional representation system, which gives maybe more balance in the sense that you will have more pluralism, more parties represented in the House. Yes, there may be a chance to have additional coalition governments, but you've got some very stable examples of places like West Germany and Sweden and Denmark, where you have majority governments often and solid, strong minority governments often as well. And I think people feel frustrated in some parts of the province that their vote is, quote unquote, wasted because they are not able to directly elect a representative because they support traditionally a party that is, not part of that stronghold. And so they may be interested in that system, and there'll be lots of debate about that. There will be well over a year for British Columbians to have a robust discussion about whether they want to change their voting system. We've tried it before. Previously, the single transferable vote model was put to the public and narrowly defeated. So we'll see what the appetite is like out there for political reform on how we elect MLAs.
Well, it's safe to say you've been very busy over the last little while. Have you had a chance to get out in your community and hear the feedback from your constituents on all of these things?
Yeah, I've been at a lot of community events lately and running into constituents, and what I'm hearing is very, very positive. People are, first of all, happy that there was a change. They see that as a healthy thing. They were bothered by the direction of the previous government, or even the lack of direction, quite frankly. And they're now seeing a government that has a fresh vision, a number of areas that they're pursuing with active interest. We've talked a little bit about them tonight. Education is, of course, one that's near and dear to me. And, just this budget update, adding $681 million of new resources into our school system coming after a time when it was really starved of classroom resources, when there were so many cuts being made into the school system. I mean, those are the kinds of things that my constituents are talking to me about. I mean, how it may relate to them is smaller class sizes, getting more individual attention for their kid, and also just getting a memo home from their school district or their school principal saying, you know what, you don't have to bring photocopy paper to the school anymore. You don't have to supply your own Kleenex. I mean, it was getting out of hand in terms of the kind of supplies that were being put onto parents. So it's good to see resources in education, because I think it's a really smart investment. And I think my constituents are very pleased just to see a government that cares about those that are disadvantaged, is trying to help people get ahead, is in tune with the affordability challenges that middle class people have, that has ambitions to get the right balance on housing policies and build new housing, transportation infrastructure, all of the kinds of things that go into a successful economy, that get goods and services moving, I should say. And also the focus, I think, that John Horgan has brought. I mean, the previous Premier didn't go to Washington, D.C. once. He's been down there meeting with trade representatives, meeting with senior people that have relations with congressional leaders, meeting with premiers. The Prime Minister, I think, it's been great to see him out in British Columbia and working closely with John Horgan. And I think we had a very difficult hand of cards dealt to us. I mean, we had the largest wildfire season ever, and I think all of the men and women involved in helping communities that were under evacuation order or close to, who were putting out fires all summer long in an exhausting battle. It was great to see. It was great to see the political support for that from a new premier and on the front lines, working with staff to help British Columbia avoid a disaster.
So it's pretty evident that this government is taking steps to really put people first when it comes to their decision making. And I understand that there is a lot of different consultations going on right now where people can have a say in the choices that government is making. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the one that people might most immediately have an opportunity, although I think the window's closing, is on the Standing Committee on Finance to list their budget priorities for the 2018 budget. So I would encourage viewers to go to the website leg.bc.ca and click onto committees for that opportunity. But we're also looking at things like grizzly bear trophy hunting and what kind of hunting restrictions there should be on that kind of activity. Where we have endangered grizzly bear populations in different parts of the province. We're looking at legalized cannabis. We know it's coming. The federal government has said so. We've been living in this gray area for a long time where municipalities have got different sets of bylaws, and they need some provincial direction. So, you know, our Minister of Public Safety, Mike Farnworth, is looking at the best models based on Colorado, California, Washington State's experience. And so we're doing a consultation on that, which we'd be happy to take the public's views on. They really are important to us. We want to get this right. You only have one chance to get it right. We want to get organized crime out of that trade, and we want to have a set of laws and regulations that are going to make sense.
Great. So again, for the Select Standing Committee on Finance, you can go to leg.bc.ca. And then also for all of the other consultation processes, if you go to the government website at gov.bc.ca, you can find more information there. Now, we just have a couple minutes left. I know you're very popular in the community. You get out and about to a lot of different events. So we're just going to take a couple minutes and look at some photos here.
Sure. Well, this is one of the Harbour Cats, Victoria Harbour Cats games, and I got invited to throw one of the opening pitches with a young woman who was competing in the Miss Canada pageant, and I'm happy to say both of our pitches made it over the plate, and it was a great game that night. And they had a fantastic season, it must be said, the Harbour Cats. This is the Pride Parade with my colleague Carol James and colleagues, I should say, Mitzi Dean, the MLA for Esquimalt-Lachosen. And man, that is just getting bigger and bigger every year. Tens of thousands of people showing their support for diversity, and it's become a major tourism attraction too. It's just wonderful to see and to be out there. And this is what's called Orange Shirt Day. So members of the Liberal, Green, and NDP caucuses on the front steps of the legislature showing their support for the Truth and Reconciliation process and recognizing the importance of First Nations ancestry and culture and support for inclusion in our school system. And this, I'm happy to say, is me standing behind Premier John Horgan there. To the left is BCTF President Glenn Hansman, and behind him is Gordon Swan, the President of the BC School Trustees Association. For the first time, I believe we've ever publicly celebrated World Teachers' Day, and we had an opportunity to thank BC's teachers who are ranked amongst the best in the world, because we have one of the best ranked education systems in the world, according to the BBC and the OECD and a whole number of other important thought leaders.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for taking the time to join us here, and thank you for watching Constituency Report on Shaw TV.